Aaron, why don't you go ahead and share with us kind of what your experience in Rwanda was, what you saw, the evils of government as you saw them.
It's an interesting thing because I moved to Rwanda in 1992 when I was 12 years old. Stayed there for 2 years, so I was 14 when we left, and it was a great experience. First time living in a third world country, first time really leaving out of the United States. I'd been to Canada, but that doesn't quite count, I guess.
Like United States North.
Right. when you go over to Africa, and it's a different feel. Growing up here, you don't have checkpoints, you don't have soldiers in the airport with fully automatic weapons and these kinds of things. And so but that was it. You kind of just take everything as normal to how people live. And I've been around the world, and that's kind of common in a lot of third world countries, the way that they police and do things differently than we do. And so, I started living there, and climate wise and country wise, man, it's a beautiful place, beautiful people. It's near the equator, but it was above a mile. So adapting to the altitude and everything was kind of unique. Cooler because it was that high up. A lot of people think really hot, dry. And when they think of Africa, a lot of times I think, grass huts, flatlands, big, but there's a lot of diversity there as far as climate and everything. So, very green, lush place, bright red dirt, most of the places, country was small, but the terrain difficult enough that it'd take you a good number of hours to, drive across the country. And got the chance with what my dad was doing there to go all over the country and learned the language. It was Kinyarwanda. It was a Belgian occupied country though. So French was the national language,
okay.
But the native tongue was Kinyarwanda. And, kind of learned some of the history about Rwanda and just the fact that they were basically two tribes that were the Hutus and the Tutsis, and could see and sense even the differences and even some level the prejudice and animosity that existed between the two tribes that was kind of normal to their life. And, unfortunately, growing up in America, I wish I could tell you that prejudice was something that was foreign to me as a 12-year-old, but it wasn't, right? So it was kind of like my view, the way I compartmentalized it, it was their version of some of the kinds of prejudice that we had in this country, which was not good, but you know what I mean? But that's how they live. And so, I can remember even within my friend group, I had 3 really close friends, and I told you guys I got to meet one of them. 2 of them were Hutus. One of them that I thought was dead ended up fighting for the RPF, which was the Tutsi rebel forces that basically fought their way out of the capital city to basically, take over the government is what had happened. And one of them was a Tutsi, and we all got along together and played quite well. Teenage boys had a lot of fun, played on a soccer team, learned how to play soccer really well. I had a blast living in another country. Mm-hmm. Food was rough for me, man. I lost 30 pounds when I went over there. I was kind of a chunky, picky eater. And that really was a good cultural experience. 30 pounds at that age,
though, is still a bunch. That's still,
yeah.
That's a
Look,
big.
I wrestled and, cutting weight, but dang.
Yeah, 30 pounds is.
I was chunky, right? So I was chunky. I was a lot, but it was like a hard thing. So
what do they?
A lot of it was just. So a lot of everything you had to cook from scratch. We had a big garden, and so beans and rice, main staple. They would make like a peanut gravy. They had a cassava root imyumbati that they would make a paste out of, and they'd have these sauces they put over a tomato sauce. I mean, it was really good, but it was nothing like I was used to. So it took me a while to get used to. But the butter, things like butter and milk and cheese and bread, they were all different. And so I went and got this banana, man. It was just like this big. It was like that big around. It was a whole huge stack of them. And that thing was sweeter than anything I'd ever had called a banana before in my life. So, it took a while to get used to. But and then after you get used to it and you come back here, man, you miss all of that stuff. You know, so we had mango trees and papaya trees, and we had a massive garden. So, you know, the unrest was something that was pretty common. I can remember we lived inside of a compound. We had a paid night watchman that was primarily for thieves. So, you know, they had an interesting system over there. It was kind of like, you know, don't get caught, you know, thieving and everything like that. So, I mean, I'm telling you, pretty graphic. Like, so they would yell, thief, 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 and the whole community would chase a person down if they were caught stealing and beat them, sometimes to death, right? Wow. So the sad reality is the prison system over there is not at all like ours. So if you were to be put in prison, if your family didn't come and feed you, you didn't eat while you were in prison, right? So prison wasn't like a funded thing where you got any help at all. If you went to prison, you better hope that your family knew and showed up to feed you, right? So I don't ever actually remember visiting inside a prison. I remember going outside a few of them, but situations would happen like this. So we were playing hide and seek one Saturday night, and it was near the equator. So it'd get light and dark, 6 a.m., 6 p.m. That was a neat, you know, thing, about 60 to 80 degrees, low humidity. But, you know, we're playing in our compound, which had a dental clinic in it. Our church operated a dental clinic there. So some of the doctors and dentists and nurses, they had a clinic there too, where they would actually make the teeth and stuff. So they had a person there that was a American that was there to make the teeth, basically, for the dentist and the clinic. And so we had basically a big rectangle that had dirt streets around it, like a block, that we lived in our compound. I remember playing hide and seek, and the kids would do stuff. All the families would get together on the weekends. We heard this really loud explosion and kind of scared everybody, but somebody had thrown a grenade in somebody's house, you know? And so unrest and stuff like that would happen regularly. Wow. Corruption was there, bribes and that kind of thing, the black market, you know, all kinds of that kind of stuff going on. And so you knew about it as a kid, but I didn't really see a whole lot of it. But the thing that I remember vividly is when they would do political demonstrations. And it was a unique thing when they would have political demonstrations, because it more resembled a gang war than it did anything that we would call a political demonstration. And I remember there was a number of parties, and in my mind's eye, I can remember the flags flying from different centers of where they would have declaring which party there were. I don't remember all of the names of them, but the one that I remember, which was pretty key in the genocide, was called Inera Hamwe. And what would happen is, in these political demonstrations, they would put grass inside of hats so you couldn't see their faces, and they would go with clubs and machetes out and just terrorize people. And I don't remember what the context was as a teenager. I didn't know, but I remember being in the compound and watching the streets be empty because this group of people was coming down that looked like a mob doing who knows what, right? And so just to kind of fast forward a little bit, we were doing an activity as school kids. We had a missionary, we call them student missionaries in our church. Someone came over to be our teacher. So all the missionary kids would have a school, and we were doing an activity where we were doing some fire building, some practical things out in one of the gardens, and heard this loud stuff like thunder. And our gardeners, you know, were there watching us. They were curious because they cook and eat that way every day. So they were like giving us, you know, tips and laughing at us when we didn't do it very easy. And on the radio, I can remember, I knew the language well enough that I heard the announcement come over the radio that the president's plane had been shot down at the airport. And that was the noise that we had heard. Wow. So, you know, everybody kind of wondered what would happen. And I remember the adults sitting around and talking about the unrest in the country and kind of making predictions on what they thought would happen. But got to tell you, the way it unraveled was like that. There would have been no way to really, you know, predict that. So we went to bed that night, and I remember somewhere between, you know, daylight and probably 4 a.m. I don't remember exactly the time. My dad was dragging me out of my bed into the hallway, and there was a guy 10 feet out of my window, trenched in a sandbag little thing, you know, going to town, bullets so close you could hear them zinging, and tracers and stuff going over the skylight where you could see them. And just hiding out in the hallway there basically for a couple of days until the UN came knocking on the door and said, you've got a half an hour to pack a bag. Everybody's leaving the country. And they declared a ceasefire, and the UN soldiers there kind of led a caravan where we stopped by the embassy, picked up the American ambassador, and then drove out, not just Americans, primarily Americans in that train, but not just Americans, but people that were in the country serving, drove out through the south of the country through Burundi with a military exit. Just to share some of the tragedies of that. So, you guys have probably heard some of the numbers, 500,000, 1 million people, killed, lots of people. And, you have a country there that had a reportedly very, very high saturation of Christianity. So the statistics I could be off on, so just have to give me in my memory, 80-something% of the people in that country said they were Christians. And, to act that way, clearly there's no context, where a Christian can act that way to another human being and be a Christian. Right. And so that I would describe as probably the, just seeing people, even young teenagers. We stopped at this checkpoint where they were getting ready to escort us out. And I remember looking over, and they had like a truck full of bodies, arms and legs sticking out. And I remember this teenage kid pounding on the window with a hand grenade, like looking in there, Umazungu, that was the name they had for white people. And just looking in his eyes, and it didn't look like anybody was there, not a real person. I've had a couple buddies that I've tried to talk out of rage, before. I have a friend who's he's recovering alcoholic now, but in the dark times, I would go try and help him out of some of the choices he was making. And just when he was that drunk and that angry, his eyes, it's kind of weird. I don't know if you've ever seen it, when someone gets that mad and their eyes glaze over, and you don't really feel like you're talking with them anymore, or that they're really in control of what's going on. Right? So, that was a traumatic experience. But I think, really the aftermath of in my own journey, watching how the adults and different people handled it was very a very shaping period of my time. And actually, it's where I wadded up Christianity and threw it in the trash. And it wasn't so much because of all the killing, because I didn't have those people as an example daily in front of me to where I would judge their experience. I just knew that they weren't real Christians if they were acting that way. And, that all was wrong. There was no context in my mind, and, deep sense of loss and pain for people, because when you hear about tragedy on the news, we've almost become desensitized to the bombardment of junk that happens in our world. That, but when it's right there and you're living it, you don't shake it that easy. You don't flip to the next channel and start laughing. You know what I mean? It's something that sticks with you, especially when there's people that you've spent every day with for 2 years that you have no idea if they've lived or died. And, and you're leaving, so there's some level of feeling, that separation too. My dad especially had a really hard time with the leaving part. And so for me, kind of watching it, there was big questions that came up in my mind, and I should have talked them out, right? My parents have always done a good job of communicating, but there were some big assumptions I made about following God and living life that I lived a good long while after that. And I started scrutinizing people, especially Christians. And basically, in a nutshell, to tell you my journey, I summed up everybody as being fake, and to be a part of the Christian club, you just had to have the right brand of sin. And if they didn't like yours, they were going to pick on it. But that was kind of how I felt. I felt like they were all hypocrites. I felt like they were all fake. And I'm telling you my experience. So I understand that there's people that don't identify like this. But the part that was hard for me is that the story of Christianity, I wanted to be true, and I was angry because I thought it was fake.
Yeah.
And so my journey kind of was out of that, not so much because of the horrific hate and everything I saw. You have a lot of stuff that if you ever watch Hotel Rwanda, that gives a pretty graphic description of what really happened. But you had the RPF, which really was composed of a military base and government that was Tutsi, which were the minority tribe. And in the country present was the Rwandese forces, which were primarily Hutu. And, in the northern part of the country, especially, the reports that we heard were that they were taking civilians as human shields, walking them in front of the army, when they were fighting against the rebel forces. And so, that's kind of, a big shaping portion of my life. And, for my parents, my mom and dad went back to preach evangelistic crusades in 2018. That's why they went back. And I think that was really a healing experience for them. There's been a lot of, I think, healing, but, just in hearing the aftermath, even of some of that stuff, and just watching, even in the context of my own limited perspective, people's character emerge in crisis, right? And so there's people that you would have thrown off or thought they were a shady character, that they were putting their life on the line, trying to help people and hiding people and doing things that you would have never guessed a person like that would do. And then there were other people that you thought was a good person that ended up being shady and being a part of stuff that was, and it was like the true equalizer, showing you that, when a crisis hits, it doesn't define who a person is. It shows you who they are.